In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can draw this cute little fox using the iPad, Procreate, and my fur brush pack. It's all in real time too, just like all my videos. No time lapse, no edits. So if you want to follow along step by step and draw with me, keep watching. All right guys, let's go ahead and draw a fox. Starting out, I'm using a 3000 by 3000, 300 dpi RGB canvas. For my brushes, I'm gonna be using my fur set. It's available right now on Gumroad. And for my color palette, once again, I've got this pre-made. You can download this for free if you go to my website, BeeJayDeL.com. Underneath the YouTube reference materials page, find the link for that, along with a video at the top of the page. Kind of walks you through how to install. All that's linked down below. So let's go ahead and get started. To begin with, I'm gonna use orange here on the color palette. And for my brush, I'm gonna start out with fur number 4. I'm gonna have the opacity turned up all the way here, and size-wise, I think probably about a 9%. And I'm not gonna actually do like a pencil sketch for this or anything. I'm just gonna kind of use these fur brushes as I go along to lightly kind of lay in the shapes that I want. I'm gonna start out for the head here just with kind of a curved shape there. It's going to curve down here towards the center on both sides. So this is going to be the shape for the head. And then now that I've got that, I'm just going to press harder now with the brush to start to knock in that fur texture here. Just follow those sketch lines around like that, and then start to come in here and color everything in, get it solid. So I've got that done, I'll kind of fine tune the outer lines here. Just come back in and kind of get these exactly how I want them. I'm going to have a nose down here at the bottom, so where those meet, it doesn't have to be perfect. All right, I think that looks pretty good for the head. Now let's go ahead and move on to the ears. So I'm gonna come up here to the layers menu. I'm gonna make a new layer, drag and drop this down underneath that layer 1. And I'm just gonna go ahead and get near in here. Once that looks pretty good about the shape that I want it, I'm just gonna go ahead and slide this to the left and duplicate that ear. Then using the arrow here, we'll go ahead and flip it horizontally and bring it over here to the right-hand side. Now, I'm just gonna pinch those together so those are all on one layer. All right, so we've got the head. Let's go ahead and work on the body next. So new layer, drag this down to the bottom here. I'm gonna come up to my color palette, switch over to this kind of off-white cream color. It'll be the color for the belly part of the body. I'll just start here in the center where the neck's going to be. I'm going to drop the size of this down just a little bit. We'll just start to bring out the body around here. So it gets kind of wider here at the bottom. So got that in, up my size just a tad bit more and get more of that fur texture there along the sides. So we've got the belly there. Coming back up to our layers menu, let's make another new layer. We'll drag this down below the bottom. We'll make these front legs coming out. We'll switch back to our orange color here. And I'm just gonna kind of pull these off the sides here. And down below, I think I want to make this even smaller, about 4%, so I've got a little bit more control for exactly how I get that shape in there. The left and then the right here. Bring those up to the top there. This one just a little bit bigger, kind of match the left to the right here. Okay. Now I'm going to come back up to the layers menu, another new layer here. We'll drag this down below. We'll have him kind of sitting on his hind legs here, kind of on his haunches. So go ahead and get some ovals in here. I'm going to up the size now back to about 8%. One here on the left and then one here on the right. Okay. Back up to our layers menu again. One more new layer here. We'll drag this down to the bottom and this will be the tail. So once again here, just kind of sketching the shape of the tail that I want. And then once I've got that, just coming back in, pressing harder then with the brush. And then filling it in. Now I want this pointed here at the top. So I went further up than what I initially had, but I'm gonna hold down the eraser. It's gonna switch over to the brush we're using right now. And then with the eraser selected, I can kind of remove some of that so I can get a finer point that I can't really get with the brush itself. Okay, so there we go. Let's go ahead and knock in some feet real quick now. So back up to the layers menu, new layer. Drag and drop this to the very bottom. And then I'm gonna switch my color here. We'll go over to this brown right here, third color in on the top row. And now from here, I'm gonna switch my brush. We're gonna go with fur brush number 6. Now, you can see here, it's got quite a bit of texture to it, but if we drop the size of this all the way down, you can see you can actually draw with this too. So that's what we're gonna use to draw the feet in here. So I'm gonna zoom in so we can see this a little bit better. And then I'm just gonna draw some straight lines here. Kind of bring that foot up around in a curve. Have it coming up just like that. And same thing here on the left. Flat on the bottom, curving up to the top. Pull back so you can see. And then we can go ahead and, just like the ears here, we can slide this to the left and duplicate it. Using the arrow up here, we can flip horizontally, and then we can pull these over here. Now you can see these sit a little bit differently than the ones on the side there. So if we use the selection tool here, we can kind of lasso this one, and with the arrow, kind of move this up. So it sits a little bit better with that haunch there on that side. All right, now we can go ahead and pinch these together to merge them, or you can tap the top and merge down. All right, next up, let's go ahead and kind of get the mask in here. So we're gonna go back up to layer 1, and I'm gonna tap this, and then we're gonna set this as alpha lock. So this will allow us to draw on the orange, and it's not gonna go outside. It's gonna stay on that shape that we've already drawn, all on the same layer. Back to the color palette, and then the off-white cream color again, we'll use that. I'm just gonna kind of start here on the sides, and I need to switch my brush back to that fur 4. Just kind of pull that color down here towards the center. Do the same thing from this side. And towards the center, and then I'm gonna switch back to this orange. Just kind of come down the center to break that up just a little bit. I don't want that in too close together like that. And I can't use the eraser here for this because since we're alpha locked, we're on the same layer. So if I would use the eraser, it's just gonna erase that orange that we've already got in there. All right, so we've got that set in there. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for the ears now. So if I come up here to layer 2, this one I'm gonna do a little bit different. I'm gonna make a new layer. Now instead of alpha lock, we're gonna set this as clipping mask. So it works a lot like alpha lock, it just keeps it on a separate layer, but it's only gonna show up on the parts that are in that orange. That done now, coming back up to our color palette and selecting the off-white here. It's again just kind of sketching in where this is going to go. That in there, and then same thing here. Once again here, you could just do one and flip it like we did for the ears, or if you want to do it by hand like I'm doing here, you can do that as well. And once I've got those in there, then I can go back to the eraser and kind of hit that edge to bring in more of that texture and bring it into that point there at the top. I'm just going to go back and forth on this one to kind of get it exactly like I want it. Just moving back from the eraser to the brush and then back to the eraser again. Okay, now that we've got that, let's go ahead and pull out here so we can see what we're left with. Finally, we need to get the eyes and the nose in here. So we're going to come up here to our layers menu, layer 1, new layer on top of that. Coming back up to our color palette, we'll select the brown that we used down here for the feet. Then we're going to switch back to that fur brush number 6. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit closer so we can see better. And I'm just going to make a couple of eyes here. One here on the left, one on the right. And then we'll get the nose in here too. I'm just going to start with an oval for the nose. And then kind of pull that down to a point here at the bottom. Get that filled in. Now from here, I'm going to go ahead and come back up to the color palette and select white. And just add in a couple of reflections here. A couple of little ovals, bigger one on top and then a smaller one here on the bottom. And you'll see I'm putting these towards the right-hand side of that eye. So we will have the light source coming in from that side, meaning the shadows and highlights, shadows being over here, highlights being over here, which we'll talk more about here in a second. So highlight there, and then I'm going to switch back to that brown color and just kind of pull that highlight out just a little bit so it's got more of a taper there at the end. And then pulling back out, then you can see what our face looks like right there. So we've got just a really kind of cartoonish look. We've got a really big head, some small eyes and a nose, and then the body, you know, kind of just sitting there underneath, almost has that kind of bobblehead look to it. One last thing, let's go ahead on this one. Let's switch here, brushes. Let's come back over here and let's change our brush to, let's do single strand thick. I'm going to tap this, and for stabilization, I'm going to turn up the streamline on here. We'll do some whiskers with this. Pulling in here so we can see a little bit better. Just pull in some whiskers on the left and then on the right. All right, there we go. So we've got the whiskers in there, we've got the eyes. I'm gonna go ahead and blur these just a little bit because they're a little bit too hard-edged compared to the softness that we've got with the rest. So if we go up to our adjustments layer and go to Gaussian blur and slide this to the right, maybe about 3% or so, you see that kind of fits a little bit better with the overall aesthetic and look of the design that we have so far. I'm gonna do the same thing here at the bottom with the feet, layer 7. We're going to go to adjustments and Gaussian blur and blur those about 2% on those. Then pulling back out, you can see this is kind of the final design. We've got the base done. One thing that we need to do to just kind of finish it up is add that little different color on the tail that foxes have. And we can do that on that same layer of the tail. So if we tap that and set that as alpha lock, we can come in here with that cream color. And then switching back to fur number 4 again, we can just hit the back of that. I'm gonna up the size of this to about an 8. And we get that other color in there. So from here, we're ready to jump in and start adding the shadows and the highlights. So let's work with the shadows first. And to do this, we're gonna do it all on pretty much the exact layers. So what we're gonna do, we're just gonna set everything to alpha lock. This one already set there. I'm gonna tap this one, set that to alpha lock, set this to alpha lock, and just repeat this process all the way down so that every single one is alpha locked. Now, if you're not comfortable coloring and doing shadows on top of that layer, like I said, you're doing it on the exact layer that you've already painted, so you can't go in and erase. You can always use the clipping mask technique that we used right here with the insides of the ears. If you feel more comfortable doing the shadows and highlights on separate layers, that's the kind of technique that you would want to use to keep them on separate layers. But we're going to do it alpha locked, so we're going to go up to our color palette. Second row here, first color, the only color on that layer. It's going to be that darkish reddish brown color here. We're going to stick with this fur number 4. And we'll go ahead and start out, well, let's go ahead and begin with the belly here. And we're just going to come in here and start to add in some shadow work. I'm going to drop the opacity of this down maybe about 75%. And then when you start to go in under here, press a little bit harder. I'm not pressing super hard right now, but then as I come down, I'm letting up pressure even more because I want that to kind of fade down. So if you're seeing too dark of a shadow, if you're getting something like this, it means you're pressing too hard. 2 options there, press lighter, or you can also drop the opacity slider here to fit it to your style. If you're kind of heavy-handed, you might want to have that slider further down. That is just a personal preference. Right now, I'm barely touching the screen, and you'll see I'm just kind of going back and forth over this to build up the shadow. I'm not going in super hard because I want to control exactly how much shadow I have there. Now that we've got that done, let's go ahead and let's move down to layer 4. So this is the front legs here. So we'll go ahead and pull in some shadows there. Along the bottom here, along that belly part. Break that up. Same thing there, just on the bottom, pulling up. Now we're going to go to the haunches here. This is where you're going to see that everything's going to start to not look kind of blobby. You're going to start to see the definition pop out. So we're going to come down here to the bottom, and then we're going to pull up and around. So you see now, we can really see those front legs coming out. There's a definite line there between those. This is why it's good to use separate layers like this. If these were all on one layer, we would have to draw that perfectly and have that dark color against the brighter color to separate those. Doing them on 2 separate layers like this makes our job so much easier. Now we still got the tail and this haunch here that kind of blob in together, but as soon as we do the tail, that's going to take care of that. So we'll come back up here then to our layers menu and go to the tail layer. I'm going to go ahead and up the size though, since the tail's bigger here. We're going to move this up to, let's see, about 14%. Let's see what that looks like. Looks pretty good. Start to bring in the shadows back here, and now you can see, boom, you start to see that back haunch come in. Once again, coming in kind of heavier at the bottom, letting up pressure as I come up to the top. I just want to have that nice, almost 3D effect there to that shadow. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and come up to the head here. Let's kind of come along the bottom here. Let's drop this down to about 10%. Come along the bottom here a little bit. Now keep in mind here, we don't want to come in too heavy down here because it's not going to show the separation then between the body and the head. So be mindful there that you don't get this in too dark there. Up this just a little bit now to 14%. Let's continue that shadow up and around here. Once again, just barely touching the screen. All right, now we can move into the ears. So up to our layers menu, layer 2, let's do the orange part first. Drop the size down to about 10 now. And hit this where it comes out of the head. So we want that head separation in there. So it's going to be darker behind. Once again, just light pressure and just kind of letting up as I go further up. All right, now we can go ahead and go back in here to the layers menu and then the inside ears. Drop the size of this maybe down to about 6. Kind of come along the edges here and then along the top there. I'm going to drop this down even further, about 60% opacity here. So once again, just kind of building up that three-dimensional effect here, looking like the ears kind of cave in there. They're set further back in there. All right, there we go. Other thing I want to do here behind the eyes, we're going to go in back to fur brush number 6 that we used for the eyes here. Make the size about 2%, and we'll just start to bring in a little bit of a shadow here behind those. Switch back to that layer 1. So let's make the eyes just pop a little bit more here, make them look a little bit more sunken in there. And then just a tad bit here behind the nose. All right, that looks good. Now let's go ahead and we'll add in some extra textures, and those will tie into the shadows we've already got, and then also we'll do this with the highlights as well. We're gonna stay on these same layers, so we can go ahead and start, let's go with the tail to begin with. And coming back up to my brush here, I'm gonna switch over to fur number 17. I'll have to play around with size here. Try it at a 10, and opacity is about 50% or so. And start to bring this in. I think I'm gonna up the size here just a little bit, maybe about 13 or 14. And you're starting to see that texture pop in there. So we're getting even more of that fur and kind of building that up. Now I'm going to hold down here on the background to select white. We'll come in here and just add in some of that white fur texture to play in against the darker color there. Let's come into the haunches next. We'll drop the size of this down to about 6. Hit here, kind of towards the middle, kind of a little bit heavier here on this side since that's closer to the light source. Moving our way up then, we've got the front parts here of the legs. Hit some white here on those, and then moving back to that previous color here for the shadows. Get some of that texture coming in there. All right, now to the body part, the belly here. Pulling that same texture here. I'm gonna up the size of this to about 9% now. Get that texture faded in there. Pulling back out here so we can see a little bit better. Let's go ahead and do the head next instead of moving up to the ears. So we'll do the head here. Put this up to about 10. that texture in there. And once again, moving back here to white. Add in some of that white here on the sides. I'm gonna make this about 14% now for the white, just to make it a little bit bigger. Because it is a highlight over here, we can go heavier, but we can also kind of throw in some of that white back into this darker section, just to add a little bit more of that texture and bring it home just a little bit more. All right, back up to our layers menu. The ears then, we can start with the white if we want to. Drop the size down to about an 8 again. Hit the sides here on the right. And then back in here with that shadow color, just add that texture in on that left-hand side. Okay, I think I'm also going to add some in here on the face. We'll get some here right at the base of the nose. I'm going to have to make this smaller though, probably about a 4%. Get it a little bit heavier here. Maybe 6 or 7. 4 is a little bit too small. There we go. Get that in a little bit darker right there. All right, pulling out then. That's what we're left with. Let's go ahead and hop down here to the feet. Add just a little bit down here. So layer 7, the feet. Let's switch back to the cream color here. And then for the brush, I'm just going to use the same brush, 6 that we used for the feet. And zooming in here, we'll just kind of hit a little bit of highlights here. You just don't want this to be a solid, massive color because none of the other areas are like that, so it's going to look a little off. And then from here, I've got black at the bottom of the bottom row here, or the last one on the bottom row. We'll just hit some black here along the back and bottoms, up underneath where the haunches connect there. So that way we just got to change in the values down there too. So, all right, I think that looks pretty good for the fox itself. Now let's go ahead and knock in a quick background here. So coming up to the layers menu, let's go ahead and make a new layer here. We'll drag this down underneath layer 10, or I'm sorry, layer 7. So layer 10 is our new layer. And back up to our color palette, switching to, I've got this blue color here, bottom row on the left. And let's switch back to actually that first 6 brush that we used. We're going to use that to work on this. Let's just go ahead and draw an oval here in the background, holding down with our Apple Pencil, down with our other finger, locks it into a perfect circle. We'll drag and drop the color in here. If it fills in everything, just slide your pencil to the left. This color drop threshold up here kind of controls how much of a fill this has. If it's giving you that white line there, it means it's not up high enough. So you can just bring it down right there. And you're still going to see there is a bit of a line there. This has a little bit of a, lip right there where we connected it, but that's okay because we are going to blur this out too. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab my arrow here with uniform selected. I'm just going to kind of reposition the circle just so it fits better with the design. I think that looks pretty good right there. All right, from here then, let's go ahead and let's blur this out a little bit so it's not as hard lined here. So adjustments layer, Gaussian blur, and we'll slide this to about 5%. I think that looks pretty good. Now let's go ahead and tap on that layer and let's alpha lock it. With that alpha lock then, what we're going to do is we're going to come up here to our layers, or our color palette, sorry. We've got this lighter blue here. We'll use that, and brush wise, let's go ahead and use brush 15. This one has like a really kind of cloudy look to it. And pressing harder at the top and then letting up pressure as I come down. I'm just going to kind of fade that color into the bottom one. And then I'm going to select white and go back in on the top. bring that down just like that. All right, now let's add some ground texture in here. So once again, just like using that first 6, we can use other fur brushes to give us a texture that can use and work for other things besides fur. So adding a new layer here and dragging it down below layer 10. Let's switch our color to this green. And then for our brush, for this one, let's go ahead and try fur 1. And I'm just going to start to build up this green color here at the bottom. So it's just kind of like grass here underneath him. Build up that oval of color there. And then I'm going to go ahead, coming up to layers, I'm going to set this one as alpha lock. And we're going to add some black to this just to add in some shadows underneath him and underneath the tail. So if we go up to our color palette and choose black here, just going really light here, we'll just kind of darken up here this side. Like that. I think it looks good. And finally here in the background, in that circle, let's go ahead, add one more thing here. Let's make a new layer. And I'm going to switch brush sets now. This next brush set, this is actually free. I'll leave the link to this one down below. This is my Christmas set that I came out with a couple of years ago. And we'll go ahead and use that tree number 2. Looks all right. Let's use that one. We'll change our color to this brown. And we're going to set this layer to clipping mask. So our tree is just going to show up in the circle, and I'll tap once there for the tree, and then I'm going to grab the arrow here so I can kind of move this around, change the size. There we go, we got one. Let's go ahead and slide this one to the left and we'll duplicate it. And make another tree here, just drop down the size. Get that in the right position. And we'll do one more. So duplicate that one. You can always go in here and tap the brush to make more of these too. If you don't want to use the duplicate, you want to just make them by hand, you can. There we go. And then I'm going to come back here, switch back to the fur set, and we'll just use that fur 6 brush again, because you can see I want this filled in to the edge here. There's some gaps in between those branches, so we can fill that in by hand there. And then I'm just going to combine all these layers, because once again, those are a little bit hard line there. Doesn't really fit the overall feel of the design. So once again, coming back up here to Gaussian blur under adjustments, and we'll just slide these till maybe 6%. I think it looks pretty decent there. So it just gives this kind of woodland feel here in the background. And then finally, to get rid of this white, let's go ahead and make another new layer. Drag it to the bottom. Coming up to our color palette, we've got this tan color. We can just drag and drop that there in the background, so it kind of ties into that overall color scheme that we're going with here. And then finally, I'm just going to go ahead and sign this guy. So I'm going to go to my brown, and I always sign with my cartooning pack. My Standard Inker Streamline's kind of my go-to signature brush, if you will. So just get this signed, pull them back out, and there we go. A fun little fox tutorial showing you some of those fur brushes in that pack. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video. If you did, do me a favor, give it a thumbs up. Also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that bell for notifications so you can get alerted when I post new videos. Also, if you guys follow along with any of these videos, if you take part in the tutorials, I really urge you to share your work online. If you're on Instagram or Twitter, post them on there and make sure you tag me at BeeJayDeL. I love to see your guys' work, love to see what you're able to make by following along to the videos. So thanks for that, really appreciate it. As for me, I can also be found online at BeeJayDeL.com. And that's it for today's video. As always, appreciate you guys watching, and until next time, keep creating.